Hi everyone, thanks for coming back from part 2. In my last video, I was talking about how the word Aries comes up in this table, and it actually comes up right where this verse is, where Jesus is talking about a woman who was bound by Satan for 18 years being loosed from this bond on the day of the Sabbath. And this is particularly interesting when you consider this image over here of the constellations. And this is right by the constellation Aries, which you see right here, Aries the ram. And he's cutting the bonds, connecting the fish, which are Pisces, to the sea monster. But you also have a woman over here in chains who's upside down. When you look at the image from this angle, she's upside down. So you have one woman in bondage in chains, and then from this angle you have another woman who's right side up, and this woman is sitting on a throne, and she's not in chains. So she represents the bride who has been rescued. And over here you have Cephas, which represents Christ. You see that he's just defeated Draco the dragon, and he's also stepping on Ursa Minor, the bear, which is also the North Star. And it has an explanation of all of this over here in this article that's based on the Gospel of the Stars. And I'll put a link to this article in the description box, but it explains the imagery over here. And you see over here where it's talking about Cephas, it's saying that he's the crowned king holding a band and a scepter, and with his foot planted on the pole star as the great victor. And then it talks about Andromeda, which pictures a woman in chains, which would be a picture of the bride being bound and threatened by the serpent and exposed on earth. And then over here it talks about the deacons for the constellation Aries. And here you have the constellation Cassiopeia, which is a woman enthroned. So she pictures the rescued bride who's now released from bondage. And so it's really interesting that right here where you have the word Aries is where Jesus is talking about a woman having been bound by Satan for 18 years and now being loosed from this bond on the Sabbath. It's also interesting that you have one right side up and one upside down, because the way these maps were designed, they were designed so that they all fit together to form a cube. And on this map you have Andromeda upside down in chains. And then when you look at this map, if you're looking at it from the upright position from this angle, you'll see that Cassiopeia is right side up, and you see Cephas, which represents Jesus, standing over here, and she's right side up, and she's sitting on a throne, so she's been enthroned and has been rescued from bondage. So she represents the raptured bride. And I had talked about in my last video how Pisces represents the church. And when you look at images of Pisces, you see how they're often depicted with one right side up and one upside down, as you can see from these images over here. And so this is really interesting because this all seems to tie in with what I've been talking about in my previous videos about Mark 11 and DNA. And it's also interesting that these images were drawn back in 1963, which is long before DNA was even discovered. And it's amazing how they depicted these bonds or cords to make them look like DNA strands. And then you have the same imagery over here with Corona Borealis. And I just want to show you some information over here that I found on Corona Borealis. And I had just put in Gospel in the Stars, biblical meaning of Corona Borealis, and I came up with this article over here. It's a page from a book, actually. And it says the third and final decan in the Libra sign is the constellation of Corona, also called Corona Borealis, characterized by a crown. The Hebrew word for this constellation is Atara, meaning royal crown and the ruler. This constellation is signifying the ruler of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who was, who is, and is to come. The wise men came to Bethlehem and offered Jesus gifts, calling him the King of the Jews at his birth. Matthew 2:2. The third decan of the Libra zodiac is crowning Jesus the King of Kings. Okay, so it's saying that this is representing the crown that's given to Jesus, crowning him as King of Kings. But you also have this imagery over here, which again looks like two DNA strands. And I just want to make a correction. Earlier I had said 1963 by accident, and I meant to say 1693, which is long before DNA was discovered. It wasn't discovered until 1944, so no one had any idea of what DNA looked like back in 1693. But I just want to show you over here in Revelation 6:2, where it says, "And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." And if you look at this word crown in the Greek, you see that it's this word right here, which is the Greek word Stephanos, and it means a wreath or garland, which was given as a prize to victors in public games. And over here it says metaphorically, the eternal blessedness, which will be given as a prize to the genuine servants of God in Christ, the crown wreath, which is the reward of righteousness. And then over here it says to twine. And this is the same word that was used to describe the crown of thorns. And when you look at its use in the concordance, you see that it's always used in terms of either the crown of thorns or the crowns that we receive in heaven, or for finishing a race. And it's only used one time in a negative sense, and that would be over here in Revelation 9:7, where it talks about the locusts coming out of the pit. And so when you put in the words mutate and crown, you only come up with one match, and it comes up in Revelation 9, where it's talking about the locusts coming out of the pit. But if you put in the words mutate and twine, it comes up in Exodus 27, where it's actually talking about the temple or the tabernacle. And you see over here it's mentioning the four corners and the horns of the altar, which is something I've talked about before. You see it comes up in Psalm 118, which in the Septuagint, this is actually in Psalm 117. And I've talked about the importance of the number 27, how I believe it represents the coming of Christ. But you also see it mentioned here in Revelation 9, where it's talking about the atonement, or the fulfillment of the atonement sacrifice. And then the second match comes up in Deuteronomy 5, but it's interesting the way this one comes up with the words mutate at the top, and then twine is sharing the T in mutate. And in this one, it's talking about not making graven images or any likeness and having no other gods before God. But what's really interesting is when you put in the words corona and twine, and that actually comes up in Matthew 27, where it's talking about the resurrection. And in this one I put more terms. As you can see here, I put corona, twine, DNA, Enoch, Elijah, which I'll have to explain that later, why I put that in. And then Adam, earth, part, and rend. And all those terms came up. And like I said, this is coming up in Matthew 27. And it's when Jesus gave up the ghost, and the veil of the temple was rent in twain, which means two, and twine also means two, but it also means twine as in twisted together. And the tombs were opened, and many of the bodies of the saints that had fallen asleep were raised. So this is talking about the resurrection. And this is coming up in a table where I put in the words corona and twine. And I want to talk a little bit more about the two witnesses and what I believe they have to do with this word over here, which actually means two. It's actually the same as the word twin. They both mean two. But like I said, it also means to twine as in twist together. And this is a theme that Arthur Prudent has been talking about in his videos as well, with the movies in Hollywood depicting this theme with twins.
Ready to continue the family tradition, you and me? You haven't got the brain power to understand this, and I haven't got the time. Show's over.
And I believe this all has to do ultimately with DNA. I believe that's what the two witnesses represent. And I'll have to talk a little bit more about that later, how I believe the two witnesses represent the restoration of the temple. But first, I just want to show you another table that I did. And I did this one on the words twine and helix. And it's really amazing where this table came up. It came up in Exodus 28, but right where you have the word helix, it's talking about fine twined linen. And so this is a picture of a double helix, a DNA strand. This is what it looks like. And over here where it's talking about fine twined linen, it says blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen. And it talks about it being joined together. And I'll go over this table a little more later, but I just want to show you this before I run out of time. Okay, this is an image of fine twined linen from Exodus 26:31, where it talks about the blue and the scarlet yarns and the fine twined linen. So I had just put in fine twined linen, and this is the image that I came up with. So you can see how that resembles a DNA strand. But I'll go over more of these tables in the next video since I'm running out of time. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.